Welcome to the Tippy Top, the podcast that helps entrepreneurs succeed by sharing best practice and creating alignment with investors. You'll hear from seasoned entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and industry professionals. The Tippy Top helps you learn vicariously because you simply don't have the time to learn every lesson through the school of hard knocks. Lucy Rands, delighted to have you on the show. Thank you again for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Lucy and I met briefly in 2015. I believe Lucy was on a VC panel of a startup event. And actually recently we've connected on a few webinars helping educate entrepreneurs on the common pitfalls that they face and helping them navigate the VC world. Now, Lucy, do you want to give us a bit of background about your experience and where you currently work?
Sure, absolutely. I can't believe it was 2015. We go back quite a long way.
We do.
That goes back to the start of my VC career. So I joined ETF 6 years ago. I have a background before that in engineering and material science. I got very interested in climate technologies and the role that they will play in solving the climate crisis. And that's how I ended up in VC. I was with more impact first and climate tech first, and then discovered the investment role and the joys and that can bring and also the level of impact that can have, kind of maybe even beyond exponentially, as it were, as you're working with so many different companies that hopefully change the world. So ETF is a fund, or is a firm that focuses entirely on climate tech investments. It actually stands for the Environmental Technologies Fund, and it's known either as that or ETF Partners. And we are based in London, investing across Europe in companies that have the potential to save the world. And I think we'll focus a little bit at the Series A stage today, and that's very much the stage that we invest at. So Series A, Series B, in companies that are at that growth inflection phase. And we think it's a great time to be doing what we're doing. We're optimistic, tentatively optimistic about the future. I know there's a lot to be worried about, but we do believe that new technologies and the type of companies that we're backing have the potential to get us to the place that we need to be to get out of this crisis. And we see that as a big investment opportunity as well.
Great. Amazing how you've got those hard skills and you're leveraging them in the VC world. Really good to see. I'm a fellow engineer, so know the journey and have the similar mission. But anyway, yeah, great to have you, and really looking forward to that Series A experience and those insights that you're going to bring. Now, as usual, we've got three main topics for today, and I've specifically chosen, what mistakes do entrepreneurs make, and it will probably be around that Series A. Then coming in specifically point 2 to that Series A, what are the minimum requirements to be considered, and has that changed over the recent period? And then, of course, our favorite topic, climate tech. Is it the multi-trillion-pound opportunity? And what are the opportunities for entrepreneurs? So without further ado, going into those mistakes, what are the main mistakes that entrepreneurs make?
Good question. I think I'll start by saying I have such respect for entrepreneurs. It's sort of easy to sit here as an investor and say, oh, here's what you're doing wrong. But actually, every entrepreneur that's got to the Series A stage has already achieved so much. They've already taken that leap of faith. They've already probably found early investors to back them, and they've already built a product and found some customers, and that's incredibly impressive. So I think that every entrepreneur we see at this stage has a lot to be proud of. And obviously there are pitfalls that people do fall into, and we can support in avoiding. And I think one of those key pitfalls that I see at Series A is over innovation or over enthusiasm for new products, maybe outside of the core focus area. So often before Series A, you go through relatively scrappy process and innovative process of pulling everything together. And by the time you sort of really reach that point of scale, the entrepreneur naturally wants to move on to the next product. And that's great when it's focused towards innovating, maybe in the same product already or in new adjacent products that very much complement that core focus. But it's really key, I think, to stay focused on that number one market and that one goal, to be able to scale that rather than getting distracted. I do see often at Series A, entrepreneurs coming in saying, so we do this, we do a bit of that, and we've also started doing this and a bit of that we can do, and that does a few things. It does confuse the message for the investor. It also just means that your time is split, and when you're really looking to scale quickly with the venture model, we do want to keep you focused. So that's something that I see a lot at Series A. I think as well from a pitching perspective, a mistake that I see is often overload of information early on. So investors often have very short attention spans. We do see loads of pitch decks per day. We do work across the number, even specifically, I work in climate. Even under that banner, we do cover a number of industries. And if the first pitch deck is too dense and it's too difficult to sort of pull out the key messages, that can be a bit of a turn off as well. And again, it comes from a place of over enthusiasm, which is a great thing. We do want the entrepreneurs to be passionate, enthusiastic, but it's important sometimes to take a step back and really tell the big picture rather than getting too stuck down into the weeds.
No, thanks for that. I mean, coming back to your first point, as you say, they have accomplished so much to even get in front of you, and it's just about making sure that they continue on that upward trajectory and don't fall foul of silly, often avoidable mistakes. And actually on that question, if across the spectrum, if looking at startup statistics, if they didn't make those avoidable mistakes, what do you think that would do to the success rates?
Yeah, good question. So I think, do you mean success rate of fundraising or the success of the companies?
I think both, with the view of getting an exit and then going on and building more companies, say.
Yeah, no, I think that staying focused is really key to the success, and could definitely improve the rates that companies succeed at. And in the world of venture, speed is so important. If you're a loss-making business, you have to execute quickly and you have to show that growth to be able to raise more money. Otherwise, you run out of money, you don't exist anymore. So everything has to happen so quickly. And if you get distracted and take your foot off the pedal on the main goal, then you'll likely slow down. And to your point, it's all linked. So if you slow down and you don't show that growth rate, and that will affect your ability to raise money. And yes, certainly on the second point around that very first pitch, I think it would certainly increase the likelihood of taking a first meeting if you have a very crisp pitch to start with.
Absolutely. No, and I think that point about focus is so well made. And what I've heard before, people say, what is a scale up versus startup? And I would say scale up, you've got product market fit, you understand your route to market, and you just need to keep doing the same thing 100 times. And someone's once said, you need to take a cookie cutter approach and you just stamp it up, boom, 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 boom. And he said, even go so far as to hang a cookie cutter on your desk and say, that's all I need to do. I don't need to do anything fancy, just grow fast.
Yeah, I agree. I also think we do still want to innovate, very much so. So we still want to stay ahead of the market. You want to be the best product in the market, and you want to listen to your customers and add functionality and potentially new products around that core offering. And I think that needs to not be lost as well. We do, we are funding innovation and new technologies, and that is a very big part of the scale up process. But to your point, it's much more about sales, listening to the customer. What do they want? What do they what would make them keep using you over switching to a competitor? And using that to guide your innovation, and just making sure it's focused enough on the same goal, and you are really thinking about how you use that cookie cutter approach to be able to scale in your industry.
And how do you think entrepreneurs should get that balance? How do you know? Are there metrics? Will you just know, or?
Great question. I don't think there's any metrics as such. I think it's something that investors can help with. And I think that it's something that when you find yourself telling two stories as part of a pitch, it is the point for me. So if you can tell one story and talk about the functionality and the different capabilities you can do within that, that's a positive. But as soon as you start telling two different stories, I think that's where you have the challenge. But no, there's no the line is blurry.
Well,
yeah.
The metric I pull out of there is one. One story. That's fabulous, super helpful. How do you think entrepreneurs should best educate themselves? So this podcast is all about helping entrepreneurs learn vicariously, downloading what you know, we've only got a short time, but what resources should they be looking at? Are they readily available? Are they locked up in business schools, or can you get it on podcasts, vlogs, Coursera? What's your view on that?
Yeah, good question again. And I think, just a side point, my favorite entrepreneurs aren't necessarily the ones that have loads of experience, though I do like that as well. But it's often the ones who I follow over the years before making an investment, who've transformed themselves in that time, who know where their weaknesses are and go out and improve themselves. And I think that's a key characteristic of being an entrepreneur. And actually knowing where their weaknesses are, knowing where they can improve those weaknesses through education, and knowing where they actually just need to hire into a role where they need that support. So for example, I will never be a CFO. If I was a founder, I would go out and hire someone to do the finances for me, rather than try and learn that myself, for example. So I think that's a key point. In terms of learning, there's a huge amount of government resource, which I'm sure you're very familiar with as your role in the Development Bank of Wales, and the UK government, I think, is particularly good at this, of accelerator programs and free support for startups, which often involves pitch training and other forms of training. I think the other easy win is asking for feedback, because you will speak to so many investors, and sometimes you won't hear back. Investors are busy, but sometimes you will. And if you hear back one in 10, it's still very valuable. And asking people to be as open and honest as they can be about your pitch, about your company, and their views on things is free and can be very helpful. So those are the areas I would be looking at if I was an entrepreneur. And you also mentioned Coursera and online, Alex, and I'm also a fan of those resources. If you can find the right course, there's some fantastic stuff that's put online, again, either free or very, very affordable.
Yeah, no, amazing. And I mean, I like what you said about understanding yourself, because it starts there, mapping out the weaknesses, what you can hire for, and what you actually want to build in house, because it's those unknown unknowns that get you, not the things you do know, right?
Yeah. And as you know, along the startup journey, you need different people at different times. So that's an art as well. And you don't necessarily have to hire everyone on day one. It's okay to have a few weaknesses at the beginning, but being aware of those, learning where you can, and then adding people to the team at the right time.
That's a beautiful segue into our second set of questions around Series A. And talking about the minimum requirements to be considered, and particularly touched on team there. Do you have to have a fully formed team, and from there, continue on that theme? Tell us what do we need?
So there's no rules. It's the Wild West. I'm joking. I would say that the term Series A means very different things to different people. And there's a lot of money in the market at the moment going in towards very early stage businesses, or what I would traditionally call early stage businesses that are raising large amounts of money and potentially calling that a Series A. So the boundary is constantly moving. And different investors will have different preferences for formation of team. I think that it's attractive at this point to have strong leaders in place. It doesn't need to be the complete team. So it's absolutely fine to say, we will be hiring a CFO, for example, as part of this round. But most VCs will make their judgment based on the existing team in terms of how attractive the investment is. It's a very big pillar as part of our investment process. So it's okay if we want to add people. It's a little bit more challenging if you want to change people, but not impossible. When we make an investment, I always say it's a bigger commitment than a marriage, because it's harder to break up than it is to get divorced. So you're committed for a long period of time. Potentially not quite as long as a marriage, there's no the flip side, but it's a big commitment, and you need to know that you like who you're working with and that they're people you want to work with, because making changes is not always the easiest route. So the diligence and the time we spend with the team is really important. So having that core group in place is definitely a positive at Series A, but there's definitely movement for additions and some shuffling where it's needed. In terms of minimum requirements in commercialization, certainly for us, we do want to see that you understand your product, you have a product, it's working, and that you're selling it already to people, and that people want to buy it, and you're really ready for that growth phase, as we talked about before. So that for me is a Series A, but as I say, that does seem to vary quite a lot for different people.
And how many people need to be buying that? Is that number of customers, types of customers, or a level of revenue? How do you define that?
Well, I always say not all revenue is created equally, so it's hard to put a number on it, because you might have one customer that's bought 10 million, and yet that's one early pilot customer. No, there's no rules as such. It's just believing that the market is pulling. There's a market pull for this, and that the customers are using it and it's working. So there's no rule in terms of number or revenue figure. It's just that early evidence that the traction is happening and going that direction. A lot of people do use this £1 million or euro revenue mark as a ballpark, but there's definitely Series A that have happened earlier than that, with certain business models.
Yeah, especially as it's so competitive. People say it's going to get in the next 5 months. Let's get in early while this has not gone out for a full process. So absolutely. And coming back to what you said about the marriage, I actually heard a stat the other day, for what that's worth, saying the average VC founder relationship lasts twice as long as the average marriage, sadly. But
wow, I didn't know that. I was there saying it's probably shorter, but no. Wow. That's quite a start.
Depends if startup goes well, and similarly the great. And then in terms of a lot of people raise seed and they're in that valley of death, and then they think, okay, next we've raised our seed and we're going to raise our Series A. And what are the common misconceptions between those 2 points?
Yeah, so you're right. There can be a bit of a valley of death at that point, and I think to all the points we've already covered, I think sometimes entrepreneurs maybe move from the seed and believe that the Series A is a given, and as you say, there's maybe different barriers for companies to come through. But most of the entrepreneurs I do speak to on the flip side do understand that it's a step up. I do think one big thing that entrepreneurs should be wary of is very high valuations at seed. Now, as an entrepreneur, there's clearly incentives to raise at a high number. It's great press. It's great to talk about. Obviously, your dilution is less, which is a very big factor. But the challenge then, if you raise a big seed at a high valuation, is that investors will want an up round, as it's known to those in the industry. So investors will want to see growth in their investment, and they will want to raise a follow-on round at a higher number. And if you're performing really well and you have strong investors and you strongly believe that you can attract more money at a higher valuation, that's fine. But occasionally there are businesses that will raise at a very high valuation at seed, and if the growth doesn't progress at the very aggressive rate that they need it to, it can really make it much more challenging to raise a Series A afterwards, because you've got this high floor of evaluation that you need to achieve. So it's something that as the market gets hot and as we're seeing higher and higher valuations, it's something I would just be aware of if I was a founder.
Yeah, as I said, that you only realize probably when it's too late. And then you're asking your existing investors to take a down round or flat round, and they're like, why should I do that? And you get into this deadlock. And I think you see it a lot with angels who, they've got this, especially in the UK, the EIS scheme. They're less sensitive to, some of them are less sensitive to valuations. Entrepreneurs say, I've validated it, I've secured this valuation, it's what the market's telling me. And on the next round, when they go to the institutions, it's not the same message. So yeah, very good point. And sticking with the dynamics between seed and Series A, you mentioned pitch decks earlier, talking about them being overly complex and dense with information. And as you say, some investors have less time than others. But in terms of this, is seed about the story, and is Series A about, here's my revenue growth rate, here's my GP margin, and I've got 200 customers? Is there a difference between the pitch decks, or is one more about the story and the feeling, or is it just an intro document? Do you want to talk us through that?
Yeah, really good point. I think that certainly when you're pre-sales, you have a very different document and you have a very different pitch, because it is all about the story. And people back. It's all about the market, it's all about the people, and VCs are taking the bet that people will buy this. And you will see numbers in pre-sales startups and projections, but everyone knows that will contain a lot of estimates. And by the time you get to Series A, as we've already talked about, we do want to see those sales already. So you do have real numbers to talk about, and your projections, whilst obviously will still be based in a lot of estimates, there's a lot more fact in there as well. So the numbers do need to play a part in it. The story is still incredibly important. And I always say that the right combination of metrics with a strong story will be an incredibly powerful pitch. And if you can get that right, you will get investors very excited. So if you can say, here is my vision, here is my founding story, here's why I've done this, here's why it fits in this market, here's who wants it, and here's the evidence of this, and here's where we're going based on that story and that evidence, and that becomes a very powerful pitch at Series A. So we need both. We want to see powerful storytellers and the evidence and the numbers to back it up.
You've lulled me into wanting to invest. So what is it? Tell us. I'm joking. I was like, wow, I want to hear more. No, that's fabulous. And can you convey all of that with a pitch deck, or should you be doing it, with a physical pitch, but maybe you don't get the meeting? Can you just send over a video? What's the best way of doing it?
I think there's no sort of silver bullet on that front. I do think that your initial pitch deck pre-meeting should do both as much as possible. So there should be some metrics in there, but not an overload. And there should be definitely part of the story in there. And it should be attention grabbing. So I should be able to read it, understand the key points, get excited about the numbers and want to pick up the phone to you so that you can repeat that in person. I think once you're in front of someone, it makes the storytelling easier. But certainly if you can have that balance both in that early pitch deck and in the meeting, it's powerful.
Great. And then some people describe Series A as a lifestyle choice, and because it all becomes really institutional, a lot of rigor, the pace is on, we've got to get through the rounds and get to exit quickly before we get taken up by the competition. Is that your experience?
Yeah, so I think there is the potential to think about it as a lifestyle change. Bringing on new investors, as we've talked about, is a whole new relationship and a whole new process. And as you go later and later in the stages of the company and bringing new investors, they will have new expectations and they will have new additional value add. So often your seed investor and your angel investors will be very helpful in the hustling stage, introductions to new investors and early clients, and your Series A investor will come along and want to introduce you internationally. Will want to open doors for clients across the world, and will be pushing you for that new stage of growth. So yes, it's a very different style of business. I think the pace is always fast from what I've seen. So I think it's a different kind of pace, right? So your early stage, your hustle stage is high paced when you're in it, because you'll be pulled in all sorts of directions. You'll be playing every single role, and as you scale, you might become more focused in your role, but the pace will remain very high. So I think as a lifestyle, being an entrepreneur is high paced at most of the phases, unless you kind of choose to build a lifestyle business versus a venture business. But the type of jobs and the time, the way you spend your day will probably be quite different.
And will there be a lot of extra documentation, board packs, board meetings, investor updates, or do you think that just scales normally with the business, or is there a big step?
Again, it really depends who your investors are. So some seed investors will want formal board meetings and the board packs, which might then work relatively well for the Series A. But when we invest, we do work with the companies to find a reporting system that works on both sides. So an ideal board pack is informative to the board and to the investors. And often the reporting is also useful to the company. Often when we get involved, to your point, I have worked with businesses where they haven't really been tracking KPIs very in depth before we get involved, and I'm able to help them do that. So we're able to say, here's what's useful to track, here's what we'd expect to see, and help them build that, and that's then very useful to them as well. So yes, usually there is a step up in reporting, but I don't necessarily see that as a negative or as onerous. It can often actually be very useful to the company as well as they start to have metrics to track.
Absolutely. Yeah. Knowing which metrics to focus on, that's hugely valuable because there's so much out there. And I think one of the things that we've seen is when someone wants to acquire your business, they'll go back and look over your 5 years of board packs, and if they are quality, succinct, full of information, you might get an extra turn on your multiple. So instead of being sold at a 7x of revenue, you might get 8 purely based on that. So I think that's huge value that institutions add at that stage, because let's be honest, if you're running your business, a board pack's a little bit of a do I really need to do that? But yes, it's in your best interest, not to mention everyone else's. Fabulous. I'd love to move on to climate tech. So that's quick question bank number 3 here. So climate tech, is it the multi-trillion pound opportunity that it's been described as recently?
Absolutely, Alex. Good question. I think there's no longer debate over whether the climate crisis is here or not. I mean, it was global warming. I think around 2020 or 2019, it became known as the climate crisis instead. And using that word crisis, I think, was a shift change in the way people think about it. And to get to where we need to be, we need new technologies. We need to scale technologies that already exist. And we need entrepreneurs and a huge amount of funding to get us there. And that's no longer a debate, it's no longer a question. And obviously that needs to be in conjunction with government and policy. And obviously we're talking this week, which is the week of COP26. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. But I think the role that technology will play and needs to play is absolutely massive. And the interest in climate tech in just the 5-6 years I've been around or working as a VC in this sector has changed hugely over that time. So it's gone, it's become mainstream, it's become very hot, and it's become what most entrepreneurs want to focus on. So most entrepreneurs have a huge drive for success and to build something new. And I was seeing this new generation of entrepreneurs that the impact is really at the heart of that. So the quality and number in deals that we're seeing is going up. And the amount of investment around is going up as well. Now, I think that what we're seeing now is the tip of the iceberg of what there will be. And I really do believe it's the opportunity of our generation. It's the challenge of our generation, but it really is the opportunity of our generation as well. So I can't overstate enough how big I think it needs to be.
Wow, that's amazing. And are you seeing enough pitches? Are you have you satiated your investment appetite, or should there be 3 times as many people coming up the Series A, getting into climate tech? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot at the moment. So we see about 1,000 deals a year. Of that, a lot of very credible opportunities. I think we of course we will always need more. So as an industry, there's definitely room for many more. So I think that the next generation again of entrepreneurs who are impact natives, there'll be plenty of room for them to make their mark and start their companies.
Great news. Okay. And a slightly technical point, and I know you talk about this quite often. People talk about ESG, in environment, social, government, and then there's impacting investing. Are they the same, or is there a difference?
Yeah, I like this question. I think there's an important difference. They're linked and they're related, but there's definitely an important difference. I think particularly in the public markets, ESG is often confused with impact. And the way I see and define ESG is the responsible running of businesses. And why I mentioned the public markets is this is often brought up and often very relevant for very big businesses where your recycling policy or your travel policy will have a huge impact on the environment. And obviously that is also linked to social and the governance of the company as well. And I think that is very important. But what impact investment is not just the responsible running of a business, but it's what is the core product and what is the potential of that core product to have a positive impact over the long term. And impact in that sense can be used as for environment, which is where we sit as ETF, or it can also be used as social, which obviously is also very, very important as well. But it is much more about that core technology. What is it doing today and what's the potential of that future, rather than the responsible running of the business, which of course we do want to build into our impact businesses. And we want to think about, as we grow those businesses, are we hiring a diverse workforce? Do we have a diverse leadership? Is our governance in place? Do we have a recycling policy, etc., etc.? But that is pretty different to the core technology and the potential that it has to have positive impact.
No, thank you for clarifying that. And actually, there's one other question I wanted to ask about the anxiety around the climate, climate change, climate, how things are potentially getting worse. Is it something we should be lying in bed awake at night thinking about, oh, what have we done to our planet and what's going to happen? Is that quite a common thing you see? And what do we do about that?
Yeah, it's a timely question, Alex, because personally, whilst I'm an optimist about the role of tech and it's why I do what I do, it's something I felt personally more recently. Is the scale of the issue is massive, and it can be frustrating to see or to want more action from government and from individuals, and also challenging to make those changes in your own life. And things like eating meat or traveling abroad that are a huge part of our day-to-day life, and now understanding what that means and what the impact that it has on the environment, and making those decisions can bring anxiety to an individual. And I think it's something that will be a topic for future discussion a lot, because the new generation coming through, who there's high rates of anxiety anyway in the population, and who have inherited this issue. And I think in general are feeling a large sense of anxiety about it. And it's a question I don't know how to solve. I think that people solve it personally often by working in impact. As I've mentioned already, there's a lot of people looking to get into the sector, and making those personal decisions where you can. But it's difficult because there's lots that we need to do. So we still need to travel to the office. We still need to drive a car. Not everyone can afford an electric vehicle. So it's definitely a point for future discussion.
No, fair enough. And in terms of the leaders of the world, are they taking it seriously, or are they paying lip service to it? In terms of, I saw this picture of 100 planes, everyone flying back from their COP26 conference, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, no, it's there's I think the UK government has put a lot of money into innovation, which I think is a very good move. And we've been leaders in that area, and it's something they've done a great job of. I think that it's challenging because it's like asking a child to pick their curfew, because it's the world leaders choosing to police themselves. And I think that's a very challenging issue, because there will need to be a huge investment, and there will need to be sacrifices made. And the balance of how voters react to that it means that the process is relatively slow. I'm not a policy expert or a political expert, so I don't have the answers. But I think that personal activism and desire of the voters is something that will be very powerful going forward, because I think if the government truly believes that people are behind this and want to make sacrifices, that they want to be policy, and that a majority feel like that will be very powerful in pushing the governments in the direction that they need to go. But I am hopeful around COP26, and I hope that some real commitments will come out of it, and that there'll be real action, and not just talk.
A great analogy with the curfew. So everyone needs to want to go to bed early. That's the key. Great. I'm going to just summarize our three main topics. Then you're going to tell the listeners where they're going to find you, and I'd love to go into some quick fire Q&A, and then we'll conclude. So starting back at the top with mistakes, what is the one thing that entrepreneurs should take? And it is stay focused and have one story. And in terms of learnings, perhaps seek to understand yourself first, and then you can go out and fill any voids that exist. Series A, it's like a marriage. long or short, you pick, but take it seriously. It's going to be a long journey. And in terms of what you need to get there, you need to make sure that there's market pull, that people really want your product, and just be very careful about valuations. Make sure that everyone can come on the journey with you. And then finally, climate tech. It is the opportunity of our lifetime. Thanks, Lucy. And we need more entrepreneurs. So keep innovating and keep building those startups. So thanks again for that, Lucy. Now, I'm not sure how, Domin, I know you do a lot of in-person panels, but do you want to tell listeners where they can find you online and keep downloading all those valuable insights from your brain?
Absolutely. So LinkedIn is the best place to find me. I'm not quite cool enough for Twitter yet. I do have a handle, but I'm not on it. So find me on LinkedIn. Search my name. I should come up. It's Lucy Rands. I'll spell that for you. It's Rands. It's quite an unusual name, so you should be able to find me like that. And that's where I share most of my thoughts. It's where I'll advertise if I'm speaking at an event, and it's where you can approach me. I usually reply to the messages.
Fabulous. Great. Thank you. Okay. So quick fire Q&A. If you were an entrepreneur, what business would you start?
Oh, good question. Definitely something with impact. I think there's a lot to be done both in energy and in fashion, which is maybe slightly different, but our impact through fashion is massive. And there's a lot of new exciting circular models coming up, whether that's through materials. I'm also a material scientist myself, so that interests me, or whether it's through models of ownership or that type of thing. So that would always excite me.
Oh, great. I've heard 10% of, I think it's wastewater is produced by fashion alone, which is a staggering figure. Great. Best advice to entrepreneurs?
Keep your passion alive and focus it in one direction.
Good. What do you like most about the VC job?
It's a privilege to work with the entrepreneurs and be part of their journey. It's an absolute privilege.
Nice. And what do you like least about the VC job?
I wish I had more time to dig into each thing. We're often pulled in lots of different directions. That's both a positive and a challenge. It keeps things interesting, keeps things exciting. But I wish I had more time to get to know each business I work with better.
Yeah, common problem.
I would put 100% of my time into each of them if I could.
That's very kind. That's great. And now I've come up with a curveball, cheeky question based on what you said. Was it difficult going from engineering into venture?
Yeah, it had its challenges. So it definitely, the benefit of being an engineer was not necessarily understanding all the technology straight away, but knowing how to find out about it, and knowing how to learn about different technologies, and being able to get to a point where you understand them relatively quickly. So that's been very useful. Yes, it was a challenge to learn the more commercial side of things. I've had a very supportive team. It's not a particularly usual route to go straight into VC from engineering. A lot of people go via consulting or banking. But I had a very supportive team at ETF who took the time to teach me, and who sent me on various courses. And there's nothing quite like learning on the job. We have observer seats on boards from very early on, and as heavily involved in the companies from day one. And again, that's been a privilege and fantastic learning.
I'm sure. I mean, and at its core, engineers, as you say, there's so many technologies, you can't know them all, but your main skill is that you solve problems.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whether that's
I did learn something at 4 years of university. Yeah.
Right. Anything else on your mind?
Only to say I think it's a great initiative. I hope this is helpful to some people out there. And again, just to make this point that being an entrepreneur is so impressive, to have taken that leap and to essentially be every job wrapped up into one. is very, very impressive. And I just want you to know that investors do respect that. I know you'll have a lot of conversations, you'll kiss a lot of frogs, and there'll be a lot of rejection in investment, and that's just the nature of it. Because as I say, we see thousands of opportunities, and we invest in very little, and most investors are like that. So just know that you're doing a great job, and you'll find the right investor at some point. Is my message to entrepreneurs.
It's glad, nice to know that you really do care, and you can tell that it just shines through. So good to hear. Well, look, thank you again for joining. Huge insights, huge value. Really, I could keep listening, but we must conclude. But thanks again.
No, thank you so much, Alex. And one last question, which is unrelated to the topic, but I found out recently that Radio 4 edit out all the ums and ahs. I don't know if that's a new technology or if it's done manually, but it's something you might want to look at with my with my speaking. So
flawless. I didn't hear anything.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I'll look forward to listening to it and hearing some of your other episodes.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Alex.
That's all for this episode. Keep tuning in for more exclusive content on how to succeed as an entrepreneur. Make sure that you follow the Tippy Top on all social channels, including Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, or now Meta, Insta, YouTube, with @the_Tippy_Top blog. And check out my website, thetippytop.com. And you can also find me, Alexander Lee, on LinkedIn. Until next time, keep pushing, and I'll see you at the Tippy Top. Cheers.